In my own experience, before applying for university, I was looking for student loans before I applied. But the student loans that I applied for, they told me that I wasn't allowed to apply because I was black. And I felt that this was unfair, because why should the past of apartheid affect me now when I'm in a new generation? We are now working on a quota system, so the government will say now that you must employ 6 blacks and 5 whites, and only 5 out of the 6 blacks are qualified, so they will employ the 6th black who is not qualified just to simply meet the quota. And I think that this is going to decrease the productivity of all our firms, because we're going to get more unskilled workers in there. Well, I think that if we don't put a stop to discrimination against whites, apartheid will re-arise against whites, and all the skilled whites will immigrate to another country, and this will become a black country with homeless whites. We will then be back to square one, and we will be then in an unequal nation. The discrimination is not so literal anymore, so it's not in the rule book. The government doesn't say discriminate against the blacks. I think that we can now build onto a stronger nation, and also, we've learned to live with each other now. And even though that is not in the rule book, I think there might still be dispute between races because of the past, but I don't think that everyone has to have a racial issue. Education, and just basic education about, contraceptive, sex, AIDS, health, I think that needs to be put across. And I also think that we need to learn now, or the older generation needs to learn now, that the past is the past, and the new generation, like my generation, we may see the different race, but we all get along now, and I think that we need to start building the now and bring the generation up and the country up now, not from the past.
There's a default that operates, and that default favors people who come from a similar background to the people who've always been there. That's not necessarily to say that people are terrible, horrible racial bigots. It's to say that that's the way we generally operate. And so there have to be ways in which you've got to sort of like break into that with clear criteria by which you're going to make sure that people can't just operate on the kind of sort of like unconscious assumptions that they've always had. Because if you work like that, we're never going to transform anything. After 20 years, the South African workplace, certainly the private corporations, but also pretty well everything except government, still deals with the issues pretty much. It's still pretty much like you would get in the United States, where you're dealing with, white majority owned, white dominated, white centered, white identified workplaces that are still working with a sort of like the mindset of gatekeeping. How many black people should we let in? On what terms should we let them in? How far should we let them go? And how can we curtail the power that black people have in our organization? When I listen to young white students in the classes that I teach, who will say that it's unfair because, say, I had a friend who also wanted to come to UCT who couldn't get in because a black person got in. And it's somehow more shocking to that young white person that another white person should have been excluded, than the fact that you could have a complete exclusion of black people, completely excluded from university. That would worry them less than the fact that one white person couldn't get in order, to bring in black people. But those young students coming in are every bit as capable and every bit as deserving of a place in the university. We had this old apartheid education system. We had a whole fractured education system where you had a different education for white people, a different education for black Africans, a different education for colored people, for Indian people, for people with disabilities, for, you know, I mean, and it went on like that. I can't even remember, maybe you do remember, it's something like 11 different departments or something like that. That's how crazy it was. So certainly by bringing everybody into the same education system, we certainly are educating vastly more of our population to some level than we did in the past. There's no question about that. Is it enough? Is it good enough? I think no. I think that we have found that there were many difficulties in changing our education system around that we did not quite understand or anticipate. One of these being, and I think the most important in my own opinion, is that we don't have a broad-based professional class. Where would it have come from? You know, when you've had Bantu education, where would you have got all these teachers who would understand the sort of like demands of the profession and of what professionalism and what it means to be a professional person in education. So our biggest problem is that we don't have a broad-based teacher cadre because of the system that we've come from. And that's not going to be easy to turn around. It is really not going to be easy to turn around. And it's possible that some of the measures that have been applied have not actually, sort of like touched the sore spot exactly where it needed to touch it, you know. Find people who identify with particular groups start competing against each other and things get difficult. So, I mean, I think as important as education on its own is not good enough to ensure that you have a good stake in the economy. There has to be opportunity for work.
If we don't put an end to this reverse discrimination, if government does not start doing the right thing by implementing training programs for teachers, if no nationalized language is established, if unison is not created between all people despite race, South Africa's imminent demise will come from a new apartheid, like the one that wreaked havoc so many years ago.